I'd now like to welcome to the stage Vardan Aramian, who's the Minister of Finance of Armenia. Minister, join us. Thank you very much. The last Armenian Minister of Finance I met was at the IMF meeting in Hong Kong in 1997.
So you have a good opportunity.
That was a very long time ago, and he invited me to Armenia, and I went, and I've been looking for an excuse for 20 years ever since to come back, because I enjoyed my visit very much. The IMF is happy with its program. You've had an upgrade or a partial upgrade from Fitch. The World Bank recently said about Armenia that the boost to GDP from first-generation reforms has run its course, though. So do you agree with that comment and the implication that we're now entering a new phase where a different sort of reform and economic policy is required?
Absolutely. Actually, one important aspect that we need to highlight is macro policy that we did 3 years when the Armenian economy had been severely hit from outside shock. It comes from commodity markets, and of course, audience here, they know that there was a spillover effect from Russian economy and that intervened into our economy. And the most important thing that we did together with the monetary policy, wisely coordinating our actions and trying to avoid negative economic growth, which we have seen in many Eurasian economies like Kazakhstan, in Belarus, but of course Armenia avoided from this negative growth. So the most important thing, which also Fitch highlighted and changing our outlook from a stable to a positive, is macroeconomic policy, prudent macroeconomy policy that mitigated this kind of risk, but of course it's not enough for a sustainable and long-term growth.
And you went from a flat, let's to be clear, you went from a flat 2016 to, in the end, something like 6% growth last year. You yourself put you put it at 4 towards the end of last year, and then by the end of the year it was up again.
And that was the important aspect. So what we did, we say, look, if there is a fire, first of all, you need to deal with this fire, create a sustainable basis for a future growth, and of course, matching all of your efforts with the structural policies. Structural policies in the labor market, structural policy with the solvency issues, with the first, because currently the 3 main pillars that government targeted for a medium to a long term, and it is well documented in our policy papers, is the following. We need to identify and target 3 pillars. Competitiveness is the most important thing for Armenia because we have a lot of disadvantages. Some blockades, that geography, etc., etc. And the only thing to survive and to be in line with the global developments, of course, to remain competitive and do the efforts and the policy that will push and upgrade your capacity for future growth. This is the main thing what we are thinking. And on top of this is a macroeconomic stability. In the micro level, of course, you need to do some of the structural reforms, as I said, in order to enhance productivity. So 3 main pillars in our policy dimension. The first one is economic policy competitiveness, what we need to do in improving business environment, entrance and exit, cleaning up the barriers, making the markets more competitiveness, and of course it will not penalize the economic potential. The second pillar is about the labor competitiveness, because if you do your efforts in the economy and you undermine labor, and by the way, important aspect, whatever, we have a big discussion with our colleagues when many ministers of finance, they try to do a consolidation, this consolidation must be done in a wise manner. Thinking about not for only today, bringing down the debt to GDP ratio, but also thinking about the fundamentals, not to penalize your medium to long-term growth. And it's also about the policies that directed toward labor. And of course, third pillar is a competitiveness of the institutions. Of course, if you are doing your efforts in the medium in these 2 pillars, but underestimate the role of the institution, how effective you can support the real sector to create GDP growth, of course, in the medium to a long term, again, you are going to penalize your economic growth. There's also a good study done by the McKinsey, the institute instigated the whole process of the whole world moving toward digitalization. And if the governments, they cannot catch up this wave, they are also penalizing their potential economic growth. And the third pillar, what we want to do, fastly to digitalize the services that we are providing to our economy and our private sector. These are three main pillars what we want to do, compounded with the macro policy.
I think your budget, if I'm correct, assumed an economic growth last year of just over 3%, and you ended up with 6%. So,
absolutely,
like Serbia, you obviously find yourself richer than you thought you were. How are you going to invest that surplus? Are you going to invest that surplus in things like the digital initiative you just described?
Absolutely, including also infrastructure. Look, there is an important aspect. After the crisis in 2009, there was a good study done by the OECD, which identified that many countries trying to deal with the debt issues, they just shift this burden toward the infrastructure and toward the capital expenditure. And the capital expenditure, they have been downgraded in many countries. Now, what we are trying to do, not to duplicate the mistakes of many countries that are doing, because if you go to the consolidation and you want to diminish the deficit, you need to do it wisely, trying to support the capacity of your economy. And in 2016, what we did, of course, we designed the previously preliminary policy, and of course, main adjustment was toward the capital expenditure. But during the course of the year, we increased the expenditure in the infrastructure, which also supported our economic growth. And in the medium to long, we are going to move to this pace, not aggressively diminishing the deficit, but trying to be more conservative in terms of the penalizing capital expenditure. And by the way, we also recently improved and upgraded our fiscal rules. Instead of having the rule on a deficit, we just switched to the rule on expenditure part. And of course, there are some pillars, some aspects toward how we are going to bring down the debt to GDP ratio and creating a buffer. But the most important part of this is more emphasizes that we need to increase the targetness of our expenditure. As you said, of course, saying more finances to the labor market, including digitalization, therefore that needed some kind of resource, plus in parallel, taking into consideration the finances and the expenditures on the infrastructure. Because you cannot find any country where you want to catalyze private investment and your infrastructure is not upgraded so fast in order to attract private investment. They want to see modern infrastructure. And if government is not there in order to create this platform for the private investment, that in the medium to a long term, that should be challenged for the growth.
I just want to touch on another very, very important but slightly sensitive topic. Obviously, US sanctions against Russia came into force last year. Armenia has very strong economic ties with Russia. What is the impact of that on Armenia's economy, and how do you mitigate that?
Actually, there are three messages that what I want to deliver. The first message, of course, the impact from a Russian economy and the linkages from Russian economy around last 2 to 3 years have been diminished. We just calculated that if the correlation between our growth and the Russian growth was above 1% before 2014, now it's below the 1%, which signals that already during this crisis years, when it creates challenges, but also it's created some kind of opportunity, and many of our businesses, they diversify their businesses outside Eurasian territory, including entering to the Asia and Eastern Europe. Another important aspect, I don't think that the second round effect of the sanctions are going to be very strong to Russia, because first, Russia already learned to live with the sanctions. And you can look to the exchange rate, how it is behaving, and also reserves of the central bank. Central bank reserve is increasing. After 2015, November, it began to increase. Plus, exchange rate began to appreciate. There was a small hike when these sanctions, second round sanctions, have been imposed. But again, exchange rate have been adjusted. Now it's around 56, 57. It also highlighted that there is a third aspect, which is commodity prices. And the oil prices are in a good shape. I don't think that in the medium to a long term, there's also expectation of many DFIs.
So you're diversifying away from Russia. The sanctions on Russia are not that strong anyway.
To Russia.
And the commodity turn is obviously in your favor. Final question, if I may. Sorry to cut you off on that, but final question, if I may. The banking system, there was a recapitalization of the banking system last year. How robust is it now? It's still very, very dollarized. 60% of balance sheet is in dollars. What can we look to in terms of government facilitation to make the banks stronger and a more valid component of credit and the economy?
You know, dollarization is something which is usual for a developing world, and when there is a crisis, of course, many economic agents, they are just shifting from local currency assets toward other stable currency, let's say, assets. It's just a normal process. The literature in the economic evidence, it shows that the most important, which is a golden rule, is a macro stability that you need to ensure, because all economic agents should be confident that a drum is a stable currency, and the economy backing that currency is also have a strong fundamental that will support the stability of the drum. Second is the important aspect of what we need to pay attention. Fighting against the dollarization, you should not try to begin from a financial markets, because if you try to penalize the holding dollar assets, then of course the risk when in this story with the Asian economy when they tried to do so, and there was an escape from a banking system. So you should be careful. More emphasis put into the real sector. On a real sector, much more must be done in order to expand. It's about the, closing up all the loopholes that all transactions have been taken place in the informal sector. It's about the taxation and the custom policy. And of course, it's about the structural reform, including accounting and introducing IFRS in order to support the companies to be in the formal sector, and then it will create a demand for a drum. These different three pillars aspect we are trying to push ahead in order to reach, not to artificially dampen dollarization. Dollarization is a headache. You know that the monetary policy, it becomes inefficient if there is a dollarization. Plus, if monetary policy regime is inflation targeting, it challenges the efficiency of the monetary policy. But the right way to do so is ensuring stability for your drum, for your internal local currency, plus structural reforms that will push all the transactions in the formal sector. That's the right way of what we are trying to.
Very good. Excellent. Mr. Aremian, thank you very much for joining us.
My pleasure.
And answering our questions. Thank
pleasure.
you. And you have Armenia has a sovereign Eurobond maturing
Absolutely.
in about a year.
2020.
Yes, you're going to be issuing a new one to roll that over?
We are thinking. There are 4 options. We are just considering which one will be best fit to our needs.
Okay, I'm just teeing you up for all the bankers in the room, you see.
Thank
you very much indeed, sir.